So this week we're watching the movie The Martian, which is one of my favorite movies already, even though it just came out 2 years ago.
And it's one of my favorite movies too, so Jeff and I agree.
Doesn't happen very often. Again, I've talked about this several times, but The Martian is another great example of hard science fiction in which they really worked hard to make this story realistic. The original book, the novel, was written by a former NASA employee, and he tried to put in a lot of those details which make the story seem realistic. There's a lot of complications in this story, but it is a very simple story that's been done many, many times. I think Robert Louis Stevenson, perhaps.
That's right. Shipwrecked.
And of course, more recently, the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks. But it's about someone who is not this time on a desert island, but on a whole desert planet. Because, as we'll see today, Mars doesn't have any running water on it, although we'll be discussing a lot about how we think Mars used to have liquid water in the past. But this movie, which stars Matt Damon, and who is left behind, as you'll see in the movie, on Mars because he's thought to be dead, but it turns out he's still alive. And so we'll be discussing how realistic it is about someone trying to live on Mars for long periods of time, because we're planning to go to Mars sometime probably in the next 10 to 20 years.
Not me and Jeff, but
I want to go.
I know, Jeff, but let's be realistic. Maybe.
Well. Anyway, so look at what Matt Damon is doing to try and stay alive on Mars, and also what NASA's doing to try and rescue him, because they have to change all of their plans, and Matt Damon is just trying to survive. And so we want to see how realistic that is. There's a couple of things in the movie that were sort of purposefully not realistic, and we'll be discussing those.
We call that literary license, because the story would not be as dramatic if they didn't take some liberties with actual features of Mars to get the plot going.
And I talked about Matt Damon, but we want you to take a look at there's a lot of recognizable faces, actors in this movie, but how they cast the characters in this movie.
Gender is important. Ethnic and racial diversity is important. So since we're looking at the future of humanity, who is running and deciding who will be rescued and when? And so keep in mind the cold equations when it was all a bunch of white guys out there in space and women who went out there died. It's a little different in The Martian.
And this movie, which it could be set today because we have all the technology to go to Mars, so it's set in a very near future. But it is sort of in a transitional thing. A lot of the science fiction stories are either the whole Earth working together to send people places, whereas here it's still NASA, and so it's just the Americans, but because of certain things that happen in the story, the world does sort of have to get together, much like we're going to see in Contact, where even though not everybody necessarily wants to work together, sometimes the events of the story force people to work together.
Sometimes you do see the best of human nature when there's an actual crisis. So as you're watching The Martian, please keep in mind the features of film that we looked at, the PowerPoint, and look at how you as the audience member are being manipulated to sympathize with the main character, to sympathize with the spaceship captain, to sympathize with the people on Earth. How does the camera angle, how do the settings, how does the dialogue, how do all of the features of film push you as an audience member to feel a certain way? And as always, I want you to think about what does the title mean, and also consider, as you're looking at it, where is the plot tension coming from? How are we being directed and guided, and as we were in Gravity, to feel a lot of concern and a lot of compassion for a main character. At the end of this movie, is it space flight propaganda? Would you like to go to Mars after seeing this or not? And why or why not? There are so many big issues raised by this film, better, and I'm sorry to say this, Jeff, better than I think they are raised in Interstellar. So as far as The Martian, I think it's really well done. It's very closely following the book. And the last item I'd like you to keep in mind as you're watching the movie is the ending. Why does the movie end the way it does? The ending was very important in interpreting and analyzing gravity, and it's the same is true in The Martian.
So we'll be discussing this a lot more after you've seen the movie, so make sure you look at it.
It's a great movie. Enjoy it.